Welcome to everybody. Anybody that hasn't joined before, this is the monthly Dharma Talk meditation offering by Refuge Recovery World Services. I'm Noah. This is not a Refuge Recovery meeting. Refuge Recovery meetings are peer-led. This is a teacher-led offering that we at World Services make available once a month. If you're looking for a peer-led meeting, you can find lots on our listings of meetings on Zoom or in person around the country. So I think that tonight I was running a little bit late. I feel a little bit scattered. I'd like to just start with a meditation. I'll offer some basic mindfulness instructions, and then we'll have some conversation after that. So find a way to sit that's upright, relaxed. And we'll jump right into sitting meditation. Posture that feels sustainable, comfortable, at least to begin with. Allowing your eyes to be gently closed. Taking a moment to release any unnecessary tension in the body. Softening, releasing. And bringing an attitude of kindness, of friendliness, self-acceptance to ourselves here and now, to the body, the heart, the mind. We practice mindfulness, bringing our attention fully into the present time experience. Mindfulness is defined as non-judgmental, present time awareness, and has the quality of investigating what's happening moment to moment. And we do it with as much of a attitude, a perspective of kindness as we can. So we're bringing awareness, but a kind awareness to our own bodies, to the emotions and thoughts, sensory experiences that we have as we meditate. Spend the first few minutes being mindful of the breath. Breathing in, feel the sensations the breath creates as it enters. Breathing out, feel the sensations, how they're different from the inhale as you exhale. course, the attention doesn't stay with the breath. It gets drawn away by sounds, by thoughts, by other sensations. Remember the attitude of acceptance. Of course, the attention doesn't stay. We have to return, re-establish, recommit, coming back to the breath over and over. Each time the attention gets drawn away, noting what has taken the attention. Is it thinking or hearing? Something else? Name it. Trying not to create an adversarial relationship with the mind that likes to think, plan, remember, hope, fear. But seeing how we can disengage from the mind, choose to bring the attention back to the breath over and over. The quality of interest, investigation is key. Even just with the breath itself, investigating what's the texture, temperature, duration of each breath. Where's the beginning, the middle, the end of the inhale or the exhale? The more we meditate, the more our attention can become more clear, more precise. Waking us up to the constantly changing nature of sensation. The truth of impermanence revealed right here in the breath. So much of our suffering is created in our minds, the mind's tendency to crave, to resent, the self-centered tendencies of our thinking. I, me, mine. Disengaging from the identification with the thinking mind, coming back to the breath. We're not stopping the mind from thinking, but we can not pay so much attention to what it's doing. Give your primary attention to the body's experience of breathing. Let the thoughts be in the background. Over and over, disengaging. Over and over, coming back to, am I breathing in or out? What's it feel like? This first foundation, mindfulness of the breath, part of breaking our addiction to thinking, our identification with habitually obeying our thoughts and emotions. The more we learn to be mindful of the body, the more we see clearly how the mind has a mind of its own. Thoughts continuing all by themselves. Beginning to wake up to the impersonal, non-volitional aspect of the thinking mind. It's not your fault. It's not who we are. But it is part of our human experience we all live with. The thinking mind that creates so much unnecessary suffering. And when we obey it, when we believe it, leads to all kinds of difficulties in our lives. Take refuge in the breath, in the present time experience of sitting and breathing, letting go of the past and future. Return to the breath over and over. When you're ready, allowing your eyes to be open. Adding seeing to the present time experience, allow your body to move, to stretch, continuing mindfulness rather than this present time awareness being something we only do when we're meditating. Include the seeing and moving and bringing your attention back to the screen, present time awareness. Give me one moment. Oh, never mind. But I needed to close the door, but it's already closed. So welcome. I don't have a topic tonight. You get to decide what the topic is. So reflect a little bit. This is the opportunity to discuss anything about Buddhism. And Refuge Recovery, of course, is Buddhism, and we, most of the basics of Buddhism are included in our Refuge Recovery program. But as you start to practice and maybe study and reading some of the Buddhist literature, maybe some other books that are out there, even just within the Refuge book, maybe some questions that come up about how to practice or how to understand, or things you've heard are Buddhism and how do they fit with what we're doing in Refuge Recovery. So for tonight, we've got a half hour or so for just some dialogue, some questions, some topics that you would like to discuss, hear about, ask me questions about. I'll do my best to share what I know, my perspectives and understanding of Buddhism. So any questions, and in order to ask a question, you go to the reactions tab, I believe, and then you raise your hand, and a little hand will go up on the screen, and then I can call on you. So reflect for a moment. What is it about Buddhism, meditation, that you might like to discuss tonight? I got a question in the chat, which I guess is okay too, but also I'll take this one from Gabrielle in the chat, but it's okay to way to ask a question too, I guess. It says, I would really love to hear you talk about fierce compassion in terms of how to add that protectiveness and accountability in addition to holding gentle, caring space. I like, Gabrielle, just the way that you phrase it and ask the question and somewhat kind of answer it. And, the protectiveness and accountability in addition to holding gentle, caring space. And even just the term fierce and compassion. I remember when I early, heard about fierce compassion, because my own sense, and I think the general sense of compassion, is that it's not all that fierce, that compassion is, I don't know, soft or vulnerable or real loving or real kind. And it is all of those things. Sometimes compassion is very much the softness of accepting pain, our pain or other people's pain, the openness, the intimacy with pain, a friendliness. Generally, I think I experience compassion as meeting pain with a friendly attitude, with a kind response. This is talked about a little bit more in Tibetan Buddhism. They talk about fierce compassion. I don't know how many of you have seen the art of the like Tibetan Thangka paintings, where often there are these deities that look like demons. And sometimes they're even called wrathful deities, with the wrath, with the fierceness, ferocity of skulls, and sometimes they're even like cutting the heads off of other living beings, and sometimes they have weapons, and all of this stuff that we would associate with kind of violence and demons, and but the Tibetans have this really interesting reframe and understanding that they're actually deities. And even the whole deity thing in Tibetan Buddhism, ultimately it's supposed to be aspects of our own mind, that they're not so much external beings as much as aspects of the human condition. And so that art is this beautiful representation, I find it quite beautiful, of the fierce, that sometimes compassion is needs to be strong, needs to be vehement, needs to be fierce in its response to suffering, in its response to ignorance in the world. That we can't, there's sometimes a danger of our kindness or our compassion or our becoming complacency or becoming ineffectual. And the Tibetan saying that actually sometimes we have to work incredibly hard to respond incredibly fiercely in a wise way to oppression or to ignorance, that sometimes it's the conflict that's necessary is about holding ourselves accountable, holding other people accountable in whatever ways that we can. So again, I like, the way you asked it, Gabrielle, around the terms of how to add the protectiveness and accountability to holding the gentle, caring space. And it's not that I can truly answer how we do that, but that that's part of the goal. That sometimes we think of compassion as just the gentle holding of each other's pain, of our own pain, of each other's pain, but that there is also this willingness to be protective and to hold ourselves fully accountable, hold other people accountable. Now, anytime we talk about compassion, whether it's fierce compassion or gentle compassion, it always has to be balanced. And especially I think when we start talking about accountability, it has to be balanced with the understanding of equanimity. And equanimity, so no matter how fierce or how genuine and authentic our compassion is, and wanting to create a positive change, wanting to protect, wanting to hold accountable, we have to understand also the Buddha's teachings and the truth of equanimity and karma, that everyone has their own karma, and that everyone is already totally accountable for their own actions. And that the happiness or the unhappiness that we are experiencing, that anybody's experienced, is based on how we're responding to what's happening. Probably know this from the Refuge Equanimity meditation, which is a companion to the compassion meditation. In compassion, we're trying to develop friendliness towards pain and caring towards each other's pain. And in equanimity, we're saying, like, I care deeply, passionately, fiercely, but also I understand in equanimity that I cannot control anybody. I can't end anyone else's suffering. I can hold you accountable in word and in deed and all of that, but ultimately you are already accountable for your own actions and your happiness or unhappiness. depends on how you behave, not my wishes for you, not my compassion. So I find it a little tricky to talk about, but we do have to look at both sides. And I think that there's a danger of us taking on too much responsibility for other beings and the kind of trying to hold each other accountable. We have to understand, we have to have the humility of understanding our limitations. There's only so much we can do. We can be honest, we can have good communication. For instance, when you're mentoring someone in Refuge, you can give them all of the good assignments. And you can say, I'm going to hold you accountable to doing these assignments. But if they don't do it, that's on them, right? You can't make anybody meditate. You can't make anybody do the inventories. You can't make anybody take a service, a commitment, or be generous, or you can only suggest out of compassion, out of love. Now, sometimes maybe the fierce compassion piece comes when we, the accountability comes when we say, like, look, call me when you've finished 5 of your inventory questions and not until then, because you're not doing the work and you're just calling to want to chat about your week, your relationships, and that's okay. But also, I'm not your therapist, I'm your mentor. We're here to do the work. Do the work, call me then. And, and I'm going to hold you accountable to that. And I'm not available to you until you have, doing the work. If you're not doing the work, I'm not here to chat. I've got people that want to actually do this. And I don't know, I'm going on a tangent with the inventories, but you know what I mean? As a part of the accountability that we can have, where we're not enabling people, where we're actually holding people accountable in that way. So I don't know, I went all over the place with that question, but thank you, Gabrielle. I hope that was helpful. And I'll move on to this next question. Are people not able to raise their hands, or they just don't want to? I'm getting questions in the chat and not live, but maybe you're just shy. That's okay. The next one in the chat is reincarnation an element of refuge recovery? Is it? Is it even mentioned in the book? I'm asking you because I don't remember. I don't think so. Yeah, I see some heads shaking. Nope, it's not mentioned. So how do I answer this? What I'll say, I guess if it's a yes or no question, the answer is no. It's not an element of refuge recovery. That having been said, refuge recovery is based in Buddhism, primarily inspired by what is called Theravadan Buddhism, early Buddhism as practiced in Sri Lanka and Burma and Thailand, and dates back to Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, and the Buddha taught that there was taught reincarnation. It's part of the Buddhist teachings that there is reincarnation. Now, my sense when I was creating Refuge was that it's not necessary, and when I was then and now, my sense is that it's not a necessary belief in order to benefit fully from the meditations and the principles and the renunciation and the practice of the Eightfold Path. In the teachings of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, here's what I want to say, but I have to think about it. I want to say reincarnation is not part of the traditional formulation of the Four Truths, which include the Eightfold Path. That it is a philosophical and teaching aspect in other areas of the Buddha's teachings, but it wasn't in the Four Truths, Eightfold Path. But I'm not sure that is totally true. The first factor of the Eightfold Path is understanding the way things are, wise understanding. One of the aspects of understanding is understanding karma. I think in Refuge, I talk about cause and effect. Understanding karma, cause and effect. Traditionally, this is also where the Buddha's teachings on the 12 links of dependent origination come in. And dependent origination or dependent co-arising is also a place where the Buddha talks about how the cycle of rebirth, of reincarnation happens. So I think that what I did when I was creating Refuge, and I have a tendency to do this, is say, like, you don't have to believe in reincarnation, but you do have to reflect on and come to understand cause and effect. And so we can understand that here and now without belief in past lives or future lives, cause and effect, karma of how things are unfolding right now. And that traditionally is also that cause and effect, the way that we behave in this lifetime is going to continue after death. The karma of that, the karmic momentum, that there will be a rebirth, a reincarnation. It's not really talked about in Refuge because it's not important for your recovery from addiction. As far as I don't think it is. It wasn't important in my recovery from addiction. And maybe I'm wrong. Actually, maybe there's some people out there that if we were a little bit stronger about, if you don't recover in this lifetime, you're going to keep coming back. Maybe there's some people that it would inspire to get their shit together, to get, to come into recovery. It wasn't my, so it wasn't my experience. I'll tell you what, kind of reflecting on reincarnation did for me, though, because I'm, I know this wasn't your question, John, but I'm going on a tirade here. I didn't really believe in reincarnation when I came into recovery, but I was raised with the perspective. So that's one of the, maybe there's not that many of you, but probably some of you are raised by hippies that believed in reincarnation, or Buddhists that believed in reincarnation, or so I was raised by people that believed in reincarnation. I was skeptical, but it was in there. I was conditioned that, we don't really die, that there's something that, continues. Probably a lot of our community was conditioned with eternalist views of an afterlife, that you don't really die, you go somewhere forever. My folks bought more into the Buddhist system of, your body dies, but your, karma comes back. Now, I also had an experience that I'm sure many of our community has experienced, of feeling pretty actively suicidal. And that suicidal ideation and that kind of repetitive desire to not exist, the craving for non-existence. And that actually, the more I reflected on the possibility that death is not the end, that there is something that continues, and that the less it made killing myself feel like a very good solution to things. Because what a fucking bummer if you kill yourself to get out and it doesn't really end. And you're just trading in this suffering for a whole new life of more suffering, a whole new existence of more suffering, rather than like, I just want out. I want this shit to end. That's why I would kill myself, because I want this shit to end. But just the possibility that reincarnation is part of it gave me a lot of pause. Now, eventually, the principles of refuge, the Dharma practice, the healing that has taken place in recovery has led to a place where actually I don't want out anymore. I'm quite happy that I didn't, pull the plug when I was younger and suicidal, and because actually, mindfulness and compassion and the wisdom that has come through the recovery practices has made life very much worth living. And so I'll say a couple more things about reincarnation. I talked about dependent origination a minute ago. Dependent origination is this model, this map of when we are ignorant and we are being driven by our craving and our clinging that leads to suffering and death, that just leads to another birth. And then ignorance and clinging and craving and death, and then another birth, and then ignorance and craving and clinging. So dependent origination just says like there's this cycle. Now, a lot of Buddhists are, this is reincarnation. Now, some of us, Western, psychologically minded, materialist, rationalist Buddhists said, maybe this isn't about reincarnation in lifetime to lifetime. Maybe this is just about moment to moment, that we're reincarnating over and over in this lifetime, that it's all just a map of when we're ignorant and we're craving and we're clinging, it's as though we are dead. But when we are wise and we are meeting our pain with compassion and the pleasure with non-attachment, and we're not coming from a place of ignorance and confusion, that's what it is to actually be incarnated, to actually experience wisdom here and now in this lifetime. And that the whole reincarnation thing maybe is just here and now, maybe just moment to moment. So I like that perspective. I also like this perspective that, like you reflect, I'll ask you this as a question, everyone who's listening. How many different incarnations have you been through so far in this lifetime? I mean, did you have an incarnation before you became an addict? Was there when you were a kid, there was like, I was that kid that was not an addict. I was just a kid that liked to start fires or whatever it was for you. I was just that kid. That was who I was. And it sounded like that was an incarnation. And then there was that teenage, teenage incarnation. Are you the same person you were when you were a teenager? Has that changed? Have you matured? That young adult, that kind of, even just the different identities that we've had, incarnations as identities. There's that great song that says, I was a surfer, I had a skateboard, I was so metal, I was, I was, whatever it was for you. I was a jock, I was a, cholo, I was a biker, I was a punker, I was a junkie, I was a, alcoholic. And that was I had this whole incarnation of being an alcoholic. And now, I don't want to get too woo-woo into, rebirth or any of that, but now this new incarnation of my new incarnation is of a recovery person. I'm a meditator. I'm somebody who's trying to have this life of service and kindness. And this is a whole new incarnation. This isn't the person that used to be in active addiction. Of course, that person still lives in my memories. There's that, past life regression. We can remember it. For some of you, not so long ago. Some of you are still, just trying to crawl out of that incarnation into this one, into this realm of being a recovering person. Anyways, I go on all of these tangents because I think there's lots of different ways to think about reincarnation, not just in the big, I die, I get reborn, but the moment to moment, or then just even in this lifetime, the different ways that we show up. Michelle, go for it. Jump in.
I'm not shy. So I've had mentees in the past argue with me about the need to do forgiveness practice and how it's not part of the heart practices. And even though it's suggested in the book, they don't like it. So maybe can you talk about that a little? The importance of doing forgiveness practice?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a pretty strong argument that it is part of the heart practices, that it's an aspect of metta. In the Buddha's teachings on metta, loving kindness, there's 3 places in the teachings on loving kindness where the Buddha talks about the necessity of forgiveness in order to get to a place of actually having loving kindness for ourselves or each other. So it's almost like a prerequisite. It's one of the reasons why I put it as a core practice in Refuge, of alternating mindfulness and forgiveness right from the beginning. My sense is that resentment, self-hatred, and resentment towards others is what's going to prevent us from recovering more than anything else. And that it's a necessity in order to recover in a deep and true way, and not just abstain, not just establish abstinence, but actually recover some true sense of well-being in our lives. So that's my sense, and that's why it's in there. But I hear your question of, what do we do when somebody doesn't agree? Everybody has different styles, and we were talking earlier about the fierce compassion. I'm not that interested in convincing anybody of anything. I'm really happy for everyone to figure it out for themselves and to find their own way, and to not get too fundamentalist about like, well, you have to do this and you have to believe this. We can just say like, hey, here's what Refuge is doing. Here's what, the interpretation of this Buddhist path is. And it's actually, you get to choose for yourself. Do you, how free do you want to be? And and go for it. You want to try to recover without forgiving yourself? Good luck. It's a little bit like in the, for me, and maybe this is too extreme in my own biases, but it's a little bit like the alcoholic saying like, yeah, I don't want to be an alcoholic, but I don't want to stop drinking. I'm going to find a balanced relationship to alcohol. And so I don't know, I have that sort of extreme view of like trying to really recover, not just not drink, or not just not be in active addiction, but to really have the freedom. Forgiveness is necessary. And, and if you don't believe that, that's okay. Like, go find your way with it. But that's my experience. That's my understanding. And I believe it is the Buddha's teaching. So, you don't have to convince anybody. But as a mentor, all mentors get to find their own way. Some mentors are quite open, and kind of say like, sure, I'll work with you. And, and let the mentee sort of say like, well, I want to do this, but I don't want to do that. I'm not going to do forgiveness. And I'll do these inventory questions, but not these ones. Or, and some mentors are quite open and be like, cool, like I'll work with you where you're at. Others, sort of where I was coming earlier around accountability, you might find yourself to be someone who says like, well, as a mentor, all I can do is take you through the Refuge Recovery program as it is outlined in the book. And as it's outlined in the book is that we do forgiveness meditation. If you're not willing to do the forgiveness practice that the Refuge program consists of, then probably I'm not the right mentor for you, because all I can do is support you in this method. And this method includes forgiveness. If you're going to reject a core part of this method, I'm not going to give you my time and energy because I'm somebody who is doing this method and I don't know how to do it a different way. So, I'm going to keep you accountable to that. And maybe you could find somebody who is looser, if you're somebody who's like, I want to keep to the fundamentals, then maybe it's not the right person to mentor. I did a meditation retreat last weekend, and there was a few people there, one person in particular that I'm thinking about with long-term abstinence in the 12-step world, long-term, many years. And, was coming and saying, I sober for a long time, but I never learned how to forgive myself. And I'm pretty miserable. And, that's why I'm coming to Refuge, because I heard that you guys know how to forgive yourself over here. And that's what I need. And, and I just felt like that was beautiful. And it is one of the things that Refuge Recovery offers in a clear way that most other approaches to recovering from addiction don't really. So hope that was good enough.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Welcome. Justin.
Yeah, I was just curious about what influence like 12-step programs had on Refuge as you were creating it, and what influence it had on you personally.
So the main thing that I feel like is a 12-step influence that didn't really exist in Buddhism as far as I could tell, but was a 12-step principle that I had personally benefited deeply from, is the making of amends. Within the 12 steps is the 9th step, amends. And in Buddhism, there's more of a perspective of like, you have your karma for your past harms that you've caused, and you own that, and you purify your karma through positive action. Now, that 12-step perspective that says, part of that positive action, is going and making direct amends to the people, apologizing, asking for forgiveness, asking if there's anything that you can do to right the wrong, to mend the harm that we've caused. I found that so powerful in my recovery and the, influenced by the 12-step world, and that when I was creating Refuge, I was like, oh, like that doesn't really exist in Buddhism. We gotta put it in there. I feel like that, that was something really, really important to put in to what we're doing over here in Refuge. So there's that, and then the whole, so there's that specific principle, making amends. Now, Justin, then there's actually the whole concept of peer-led recovery, mutual help society, of one addict helping another addict, fellowship, is all inspired by Alcoholics Anonymous as the original 12-step program that then inspired NA and CA and MA and all of the other anonymous programs. I benefited and was very inspired by one addict helping another, one alcoholic helping another, rather than, and getting, even in the spiritual practice, what the 12 steps did was so radical, saying like, you can have this direct relationship with God. You can have this, higher power, whatever, rather than needing to go through the church or the priest or some intermediary. You can have this direct experience. That was a radical thing that the 12 steps did. And then me, and Buddhism being a bit, non-theistic, but also Buddhism has the same system of like, well, you need a Dharma teacher, and you need a temple, and you need a tradition and a lineage. And us also doing this radical thing, saying like, you don't need a meditation teacher. You can teach each other. You don't need, to be part of some religious structure. You can apply this to your own life and support each other in this. Is this really radical, peer-led, helping each other, spiritual practice, totally inspired by what they did in Alcoholics Anonymous 90 years ago. Totally inspired by what they did. So a lot of influences. I was in an AA meeting a couple of years ago. At one of the meetings I got sober in 35 years ago. And some of the old folks that knew me for decades were in there. And some of them don't like that I went off and created a different recovery approach, but some of them do. And, one of the old guys was like, it's so great to see Noah here at this meeting. And, what he did with Refuge Recovery, he's like, it's just a testament to the 12 steps and how, the 12 steps created this peer-led recovery movement. And then there's been all of these different things that have come off it. He said, and in my mind, Refuge Recovery is part of the 12-step lineage. Now, I know some of you have so many resentments towards the 12 steps, you don't like hearing that. But I quite liked hearing it because I think it's quite true. Because if I hadn't, found refuge if I hadn't found the fellowship of those 12-step rooms and the people that, even though they were speaking a philosophy that didn't resonate with me and a religious view that didn't make sense to me, what I found there was a bunch of addicts helping each other. And that helped me and let me be Buddhist while hanging out with the 12-step people, and eventually led to the creation of Refuge Recovery. So I could probably think of a couple of other things, but those are some of the things that come to mind, Justin.
So for your personal experience, you were sober quite a while before creating Refuge, and that was through a 12-step program?
Yeah, I started, I've been sober since 1988. And in 1988, when I entered into recovery, I started practicing Buddhism right away. I started meditating and practicing Buddhism, but I also went to 12-step rooms because it was the only, the Buddhists that I was hanging out didn't really understand addiction. They understood Buddhism, but not really addiction. And then the 12-step people understood recovery, but they didn't really understand Buddhism and not having a higher power and being a meditator. So yes, I continue, and I'm always open about this. I continue to participate in AA, and it's been a part of my life for 35 years. But Buddhism always made more sense to me, and it always was actually my recovery program, because it's what I was doing for my recovery. Even though, I've done lots of rounds of the 12 steps, but from a Buddhist perspective. Last one, Donna.
Hi there. This has been so great and enlightening, Noah, but I think it's kind of piggybacking on Justin. I had a friend who's recently started AA, and I'm just saying, hey, there's also something else, because what he came to me to say is that he really has a problem saying, I'm an alcoholic, and he's seeing people who've been there 35 years and they're still, it's almost like it's keeping you, like, what is the view that's different? Because it's almost like they're keeping in constant suffering of that. And I love what you said about incarnating. And there was a time in our life when we weren't addicted. And, how I love when you said a recovering person, as opposed to I'm an alcoholic, owning that. I mean, I'm just confused and I don't know enough to really know what to say to him or even to understand it.
My own opinion is that there is some benefits to all of us. It's even in Refuge, the first truth, accepting, admitting, acknowledging, doing away with any shred of denial about the fact that we've become addicts. It is our first step also. We don't introduce ourselves in that way, or take on that identity as the way that we introduce ourselves, or this identity of, well, who I am as an addict, although that is true about us. And it was probably really radical and liberating for those people in the 1930s and 40s to admit that they were alcoholics, and to actually introduce and to take the shame away from being an alcoholic and say, my name's Noah and I'm an alcoholic. That was probably really, groundbreaking, when there was such a stigma and so much shame around it. So they were kind of owning it. And then it just became the thing. And here we are 90 years later, and no matter how long you've been sober, you continue to introduce yourself and name your, I even have been to some meetings where they say, what's your name and what's your disease? So of course we don't adhere to all of those. Refuge doesn't share all of those perspectives. This isn't really your question, I don't think, Donna, but I'll reflect this to you. With the reincarnation and the identification. Part of what Buddhism is asking us to do is to investigate what we're identified with, our personalities. Like even that question of like, who are you? And, what would you say? Well, my name is this, and my profession is this. Then maybe you'd start to get down to like, well, my gender identity is this, or my, subculture is this, or my, I'm passionate about these things. That's part of who I am. In the meditation tonight, I said something like, we, start to see that we're not our minds. Maybe at some point in, your Buddhist exploration, you'll start to see, this body isn't really who I am. This body that is subject to sickness and aging and death, this impermanent form, it's not my true identity. This is such a temporary form that's unfolding here. So in this lifetime, I have these relative identities of male or female or transgendered or straight or gay or bisexual, or I have all of these relative things that are true, totally true on the relative level. But ultimately, I'm not my gender, I'm not my sexual orientation, I'm not my race or my religious upbringing. None of those things are actually aren't my true self. That's not who I really am. Those are just conditions of this lifetime. Likewise, being an addict, being an alcoholic, your friend's question about like, do I have to keep being, you can understand it on a relative level. Yeah, on a relative level, like you're an alcoholic, you're an addict, whatever. It's not who you really are, but it's part of what's happened in this incarnation. It's not your true identity. It's, you don't need to, but it's part of the experience in this life. And one of the good things, I think, of remembering in the way that they do over there, remembering that we're alcoholics or addicts, is to remember that we don't get to, we don't return to using. We don't return to, like, I'm an alcoholic, therefore I don't drink one day at a time, all of that. I'm an addict, therefore I don't engage in that stuff. And that there can maybe be the danger over here with what we're doing. One of their critiques of us might be like, hey, you guys are going to forget. You don't even, introduce yourselves as addicts. You might forget you're an addict and think that you can go do some psychedelics and call it psychotherapy. Just thought I'd throw that diss out there for anybody who's thinking about using psychedelics as treatment. Anyways, I'm gonna end there. I hope that was helpful, Donna, and everybody. Good to see you. With something like this, where it's a Q&A, some of it's traditional Buddhism, some of it's my views and opinions. I hope that it's helpful. I ask you to not believe a word I say, but to reflect on it and to find out for yourself what's true. You know, I don't at all want to be the ultimate authority or demand any sort of faith from anyone. I share my experience, my understanding of Buddhism. You know, you get to find out for yourself what's true for you. And this is the spirit of the Buddha's teachings, of the Dharma, is that we all have to find out for ourselves and do the work for ourselves. So I you know, end with that. May any goodness that comes from our practice and meditation and discussion of the Dharma tonight be shared outward in all directions, sharing this merit with all of the suffering addicts who haven't found recovery yet, as well as all of us in recovery who haven't quite ended our suffering yet. And outward in all directions, may each of us get as free as possible, and together may we create a positive change on this planet. Thanks everybody for tuning in tonight, and